Untamed is going to be untamed. It's going to be a little crazy. I want to talk to my people. I want to talk to my brothers and sisters. We can have grace and humility in how we interact with other people.
Oh, hot dog, look at you.
And nobody talked about what's really happening.
And let's have conversations about what truth is. Hey, so welcome back. Happy Monday. I want to eat an apple while I'm sitting here talking to you, so my wonderful assistant brought me this stuff. It's like, see, I think she was saying that at one point I was getting too fat, so she had to make me eat good food. My daughter does too. She does that stuff to me all the time. She keeps wanting me to eat healthy. I'm like, that's just overrated. Okay, let's talk about today, shall we? Before we talk about today, I want to play a video. And I saw this video this morning, and it reminded me of my grandfather. Because he was pretty committed. He was a committed guy. And he passed away at 85. So this is kind of a feel-good video that you guys got that ready? So I'm going to play this for you. Let's go ahead and play it.
Hi. I'm Doug across the street over here, right? I live over in that house there.
Okay.
And there's an invite to a party on February 15th.
Okay.
But I didn't want to leave it in the mailbox because when you read
He
it...
gives me this little invitation that literally looks like he used like some sort of like pen to then like make copies of these and give them out to all of our neighbors. And it says, a celebration of winter, February 15th, 4 p.m. until the cops arrive. Until the cops arrive. He's literally 85. It says food and drinks will be there. Only bring a smile. RSVP to his email, and he gave his phone number. Love, Doug.
Yeah, pretty cool. We don't see that anymore. We don't get much of that anymore. It's not a place that you get anybody that just... Now, I throw parties in my neighborhood. All my neighbors are cool. But you don't see it much anymore. And by the way, that was a tribute to his wife that was on the table who had passed away. And it was just his way of connecting the neighborhood. We need to get back to that instead of, the brave people on Twitter and the Kardashian crew that seems to run our government and think that everything is an emergency. I will say this, it kind of is an emergency. Something's going to happen. I feel like something's going to happen. And I put something up on social media and I was like, I feel like something is about to happen. You got President Trump talking about a bunch of stuff, but more importantly, it just feels like it's going to break free. And Alex Jones, man, he is the king of the crown, the tinfoil crown. Yeah, but he's been right more times. I don't know if he aligned himself with 1984 or not. But a lot of things that he said over the years have definitely come true. And yesterday he put out a special when I was watching the special, and he talks about bringing on Kash Patel. Excuse me, that's not true. Talked about bringing on Kyle Seraphin. And when he was talking about bringing on Kyle Seraphin, he's like, Kyle's gonna... That's your way of saying that there are people around Alex Jones that are like, hey, you probably shouldn't have Kyle Seraphin on. Because Kyle Seraphin is just kind of in your face, and they want to keep this kind of cool demeanor, this decorum, right? That doesn't bother them. And, he talked about the fact that he almost got grand juried like 12 times. I don't know how many times, a lot. And that he got indicted through a grand jury for January 6th, and then they decided, wow, he did tell people not to go, so it's going to be hard to indict him. But I was watching it, and I see the things that are heating up. It reminds me of how much weakness surrounds the strong. And President Trump, I think, is a very strong individual, but the weak people around him in Con Inc. tell people who to talk to and who not to talk to. And my guess is, and I just read people very well, is that somewhere along the line, someone told Alex Jones that, you keep having Kyle Seraphin on. And so he made this kind of, sometimes he says something, I'm like, I don't know if I just want him, he's going to just kind of want the FBI to, And what that is code word for, I need protection. And I'm going to have him on. I mean, someone of importance said, hey, don't let this guy come in and take shots at Kash Patel on your show. Because that's how it works, right? The weak control the strong. I think Alex Jones is also a pretty strong guy. And unfortunately, weak people don't want strong people to rise up. They don't want strong people to have a voice in the community, because when that happens, the weak people lose their stance at every level, So I'm going to talk about a few other things before we bring our guests on, but let's start here. We're in the throes of urban chaos. And this is going to be a pretty explosive show. We're going to dive into the things that reshape America and the world in large part. And we'll talk about what's happening in D.C., where Trump has basically taken back over Washington, D.C., and there hasn't been a murder in 11 days. And President Trump is challenging institutions in a way that is unheard of, which makes me fear for him. Because again, he's a very strong man. He's surrounded by very weak people. I think Susie Wiles is probably the smartest one and the strongest one around him, frankly. I was wrong, very wrong. She's kept a very level head about herself over the last 9 months. And it's refreshing, actually, to have someone that doesn't really enjoy the light at all, just wants to kind of push some buttons behind it. She could hate me or not hate me. I don't care. But the reality of it is that she is gone and said, here's what we want to do. She's the chief of staff, and she's done a really good job of trying to protect and feed information to President Trump when needed. You have ATVs and motorcycles running through the Capitol and citizens protesting in the street. This is kind of a unique moment where you have civil engagement, which is probably paid for. Societal tensions collide with this leadership and engagement, and it's neat to see, actually. You say, man, it's just tensions. Maybe. So we're going to have a conversation with James Kunstler. He's an acclaimed urban critic and cultural commentator. He's worked on dissecting America's urban decay and social dysfunction. This should be a really interesting conversation. And then round two, we're going to have Casey back on, who is the car guy. I had a great conversation on the phone with him, and I was like, man, we got to talk again. And we're going to talk again about why it is that a guy as talented and as strong as he is can't find his way in the world of just honing in on using that success. I mean, built a car that gets 150 miles per gallon, and nobody called him. How does that happen? But before we do that, before we talk about our guests anymore, I want to put up this. This is Mark Cook, built this American Declaration of Independence from election manipulation. Something's about to happen. Something is about to happen. People are going to get arrested. And this is kind of a replay of, if you didn't get a chance to read it, I'm going to see if I can put it up in some places. If you guys can drop it on Rumble and other places. But it basically said, we hold our truths to be self-evident that all citizens are endowed by their creator with the right to choose their representatives through elections that are free, fair, simple, transparent, and verifiable by every citizen, regardless of education or means, that the consent of the governed, expressed through their sacred act of voting, is the sole legitimate source of governmental authority. that when any system, technology, or cabal, whether domestic or foreign, subverts this consent through fraud, coercion, complexity, or obfuscation, it is the right and the duty of the people to reject such tyranny and institutional reforms rooted in clarity, accessibility, and public oversight. The integrity of the elections conducted with hand-marked, hand-counted paper ballots under the watchful eyes of citizens is the cornerstone of a free republic, and no machine, bureaucracy, or unaccountable actor should stand between the people and their vote. The history of recent election practices in the United States reveals that relentless pattern of abuses, all designed to erode the sanctity of the vote and usurp the will of the people. To prove this, let's facts be submitted to the candid world. The suppression of eligible voters through purges of registration rolls, intimidation at polling places, miscommunication of voting times and locations, and barriers targeting minorities, the elderly, and non-English speakers, calculated to silence their voices. Creation of fraudulent identities, registration of deceased or fictitious voters, with exploitation of lax verification of inject phantom ballots, diluting the will of the legitimate citizens. The manipulation of ballots through stuffing, harvesting, discarding, or altering votes, whether physical or digital, often concealing by broken chains of custody or fabricated emergencies, tampering with electronic voting systems, through hijacking, malware, through hijacking, malware, backdoors, and counterfeit equipment, rendering machines untrustworthy and vulnerable to undetected fraud. Coercion and bribery of voters, poll workers and officials, exploiting desperate of greed while complicit law enforcement and judges shield perpetrators from accountability. Misreporting of results through delayed tallies, falsified records, sabotaged audits, and redefined verification process to obscure discrepancies. The infiltration of foreign actors and cyber attacks on voter databases and systems, compromising the sovereignty of our democratic process. Use of dark money, illegal, funded, and fake organizations to tilt campaigns, siphon resources, and mislead citizens from genuine reform efforts. The deployment of disinformation, psychological operations, deep fakes, and media manipulation confuse, demoralize, and mislead voters, sowing division and mistrust. The insider threat from corrupt officials, infiltrated grassroots organizations, and manipulated legal processes, including lawfare, gerrymandering, and court stacking to entrench power against the people's will. The systematic exploitation of legal ambiguities, weak oversight, centralized control, and unaccountable technologies created fertile ground for fraud under the guise of efficiency. The reliance of complex electronic voting machines, which obscure the counting process, lack transparency, and expose elections to manipulation, distancing citizens from direct oversight. The centralization of voter registration and election management, removing local control and empowering unaccountable entities to dictate outcomes. The denial of public access to election records, such as cast vote records, and chain of custody documentation under pretext of proprietary concerns, exorbitant fees, and misrepresentation of retention periods. Failure of limited absentee ballots, which without rigorous scrutiny invites fraud through unverified ballots that cannot guarantee secrecy or integrity. In every stage of these oppressions, we have sought redress through petitions, lawsuits, public forums, and tireless advocacy, only to be met with denial, delay, and accusations of undermining democracy. We have proposed reforms to restore trust, such as returning voter registration to county control, limiting absentee ballots, conducting elections on a single day in the small precincts, and hand count and counting hand-marked paper ballots under public scrutiny. We have demonstrated through efforts of those of citizens advocating for hand-count elections that simple, transparent methods are not only feasible but essential to reclaiming our electoral process. Yet those in power have dismissed our pleas, obstructed transparency, and clung to systems that obscure the people's will. A system that permits such abuses, that entrusts the vote to opaque machines and unaccountable bureaucracies, is unfit to serve a free nation. We have not been silent in our resolve. We have educated our fellow citizens through work groups, demonstrations, and public audits, exposing scandal like corrupted cast vote records and manipulated voter rolls. We have called for elections to be conducted in small precincts of no more than 1,500 citizens, with paper ballots dropped into translucent containers, counted by hand under high-definition video, and verified by bipartisan citizens. We have urged counties to reclaim sole custody voter registration, verified in person with witness signatures, and to publish read-only voter list in a universal format to public cross-referencing. We have advocated for limited absentee ballots and those with proven needs, scrutinizing rigorously to prevent fraud, and for designating a single national voting day to eliminate staggered manipulation. Yet these efforts have been met with resistance, bureaucratic inertia, and accusations of mistrust, leaving us no choice but to declare our independence from this corrupted system. Let me just tell you something. The more I read about what Mark Cook just wrote, it brings me down to one thing. And so we're going to talk about that thing today, and that is the degradation of our society. A slow boil to a place where lawlessness becomes the rule of law. And we're already there. Much of what we face today is the direct result of people taking too much off the bone. And when you get a lot of corrupt people in a lot of positions of power that are either weak, feckless, or willing to take a half pound of silver in order to betray the American people, this is what you get. What we have in society today is what you get. And I think that is going to be the biggest takeaway from today, is that every 400 years or so, we have to fight a judiciary. And right now, our judiciary is the one thing that stands between us and getting our resolve. They are the crime family, the cartels. And they go by judges and they wear black robes. And they get to hide their addresses. And they get to persecute people with impunity. So it should be an interesting conversation today. We got a lot to talk about. My hair is intact, Allie. It is absolutely intact. We're here to talk about it. And let me just tell you about our guest, because I'm gonna go ahead and bring him on, our first guest. James is, as I said before, he's an urban critic and cultural commentator. He's born in New York City, so we're going to love his accent. We're going to love that. Raised in Long Island, it's going to get worse. We're going to love his accent here. We'll make him talk to us all day. He's a graduate of the State University of New York in Brockport. He's a former reporter, feature writer, and staff writer for Rolling Stone before becoming a full-time author in 1975. Key work on American landscape and cities. He's the Geography of Nowhere. So critiqued the American suburban sprawl and tragic built environment. Home from Nowhere continued focus on remedies from urban and suburban design failures. It's going to be fun to talk about. The Long Emergency, examining the threats of peak oil, climate change, converging 21st century crisis. I don't believe in climate change. We'll see how that goes. I believe the climate does change. I just don't think man made it change. So we'll see how we do. Anyway, his resume is very long, so I'm not going to waste any more time, and I'm going to take this time with him. James Kunstler, welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure. Can you see me okay?
I can see you okay.
I seem to be on a delay in the video.
Oh yeah, so are you on? You must be on the Zoom then. Is it on a Zoom link?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're gonna look like you're Jackie Chan trying to talk to us. Like, wait.
Okay. So you're Joe.
I'm Joe.
Okay, Joe. Just so I do want to correct something. I was not raised on Long Island. I spent a couple of years there before my parents got divorced, and I actually grew up in Manhattan.
Oh,
and
that's even worse.
And I actually don't have that much of a New York accent, so
you
I don't want to shock you.
I am shocked.
No, I can do a lot of accents. I can do New York, and I can do.
Does your accent come out when you get pissed off? I just want to know if it comes out when you get pissed off.
No, not really. No, I just get loud and scary.
Oh, loud and scary. East Coaster. I'm an East Coaster from D.C., Washington, D.C.
Well, I've been there many times. I lived there for about 5 months. After I dropped out of corporate journalism in 1975, I rode a motorcycle across the country, and I landed in Washington, D.C., where an old girlfriend of mine who had, transmogrified into a friend was living in a house in Georgetown with a bunch of roommates, and she let me flop there for about 3 months, I was driving an Arlington yellow cab.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So tell me what we had this clip of Mamdani. Are you living in New York right now, by the way?
God, no. I live about 200 miles north of New York City in the upper Hudson Valley, about 40 miles north of Albany, 15 miles east of Saratoga, and 10 miles from the Vermont line, if that gives you my coordinates.
Yeah. I mean, I might be able to drop you a donut there. I know exactly where
Yeah,
it is.
well, it's a beautiful corner of upstate New York.
Yeah.
It's Washington County, New York.
All right. Well, I wanted to show you this because, we're going to talk about how society has basically gone to hell in a handbasket. And it doesn't seem to have what happened in the city first is now reaching every suburban community across the country, from crime to what can only be can be described as chaos. Well, let's go ahead and play this first clip.
You move up in the polls. Yeah. This is how you move up in the polls. Yeah. Yeah. Let's go. Yeah. Let me get one more. Let me get three. Yeah.
So I just want to point out it's 135 pounds.
Yeah.
And
I guess Zoran didn't eat his Wheaties or his tofu.
But the guy was holding the bar up.
Yeah, right. That too. Yeah. I used to be able to bench press my girlfriends, but it's not so much anymore.
Well, I tell you what, I regularly work out with 235, and I don't. If somebody put 135 pounds on it, I need a spot. I got bigger problems. Sorry, I'm a big boy. I'm 6'2", so.
Yeah. Well, you're also not running for mayor of New York, so. Lucky you.
Lucky me. You've kind of talked to people about this this hollowing out before this great collapse. With President Trump shaking up Washington, and what do you think? Do you think we're headed towards a systematic failure, or do you think that this is the prelude to stop what has been going on this slide?
I think there's still a pretty high probability of some kind of a combo collapse. Certainly a very high probability of some kind of financial / economic collapse. And, along the declension of that would be, social collapse, cultural collapse, civilizational collapse. I actually wrote 4 novels in a series about that, trying to depict what it would look like. It's called the World Made by Hand series. And I recommend it if people want to get a comprehensive picture of how I think about that. Right now, we seem to be in we're in a sketchy part of the social collapse at the moment. And it's really been, I think that a great deal of it is mysterious. When I wrote my book, The Long Emergency, which was largely about issues, on the ground issues like peak oil and corrupt banking and things like that, I didn't realize how profoundly the American collective psychology would be disordered by the things that I predicted would happen. That was the one component I missed. And what's really gone on, what's really surprised me is how psychologically disordered the country has become, to the extent that, we really can't think straight. And there seems to be a political faction that is seeking to take every advantage of that problem and make it worse. And the faction I'm speaking of course, is the Democratic Party, who I call the progressive Jacobins. And that is a reference to the party that turned revolutionary France upside down and inside out in 1793. And in much the same way that the progressives, so-called, are doing it today, largely through the manipulation of language and disordering people's minds by making making it impossible for them to determine what reality is, so that we cannot construct a consensus about what is happening to us, and we can't. It's very hard for us to do anything about it.
All right, so you just talked about the manipulation or the capturing of language.
Yeah.
You could argue, James, if you went backwards, you could argue that if you got rid of the Smith Modernization Act of 2012, it would force media into a more responsible environment because it would give you access to the ability to sue them for lying to the general public. Right now, it's actually legal because of the Modernization Act of 2012 done under Obama, right?
Mm-hmm.
So why is it that, I'm not the smartest guy in the room. I'm fairly intelligent, but you have all these talking heads in Washington and other places. They have to be able to see or understand this collapse that's happening. They have to be able to recognize it. And in order to go backwards, you have to kind of back your way out of things. So why is it that our leaders, even on both sides, because, by the way, I've met a couple of Democrat senators or congressmen that just keep quiet that are actually pretty reasonable people. So why is it that someone hasn't made the recommendation that if you want to get out of all of this, we just stop them from being able to lie?
Well, that's one of the big mysteries about what's going on right now. And, one of the conclusions you can come to is that there may be simply something so irresistible in the zeitgeist, that is, the spirit of the age, that is making it impossible for us to accomplish the things that we need to do. For example, today I was listening to some debates about reforming the voting laws so that you have to present proof of citizenship, and we need to switch to paper ballots and get rid of voting machines, which are obviously corrupt, are able to connect to the internet and therefore susceptible to cheating. And it's impossible to understand. It's why anybody would be against that, other than the fact that they really want to cheat. But that would seem to draw a clear boundary between the Republicans and the Democrats now, although obviously it doesn't draw a clear boundary. And of course, one of the problems with this progressive Jacobin Marxist disordering of the mind is that one of the main tools for doing that is erasing boundaries. And this is a boundary that they have successfully erased, that there's that there's anything that you can't improve the voting system by changing these very concrete things. And so is that part of the zeitgeist? The zeitgeist being that we are now living in a culture without boundaries, where it is impossible to see where things begin and end, and who's on what side, and what's real and what's not real.
Okay.
But I don't know individually, if we made a list of the U.S. Senate and asked ourselves, why are they doing the crazy things they're doing and why they're not accomplishing the things that they must,
right.
It would be very hard without interrogating them, without sitting them down in a room with a good cop and a bad cop and actually, forcing the issue, really.
What's interesting about what you're saying is that I like to study economics.
Yeah,
right?
Me too.
And when you study the economics, and that there's a measurement by the confidence, the confidence marker for consumers and for people in politics and for your leaders. So you have these different confidence markers, and you could argue that right now we're at an all-time low across the board in every category on both sides of the aisle. I mean, so much so that I felt the same way back in 2007 consumer confidence that was at an all-time high because they were giving away all these entitlements. They hadn't yet to give away a bunch of money. And I said in November of 2007, I wrote this paper. I actually have it framed. And I was like, we're headed towards a collapse that we've never seen in the history before, a history of our country before. And obviously we know what happened in October of 2008, where the entire economy collapsed on itself. And then they blamed it on the mortgage crisis.
Well, it was really the financial sector that collapsed and dragged a lot of stuff down with it. But that was because the investment sector and the banking sector was so corrupt, and they were, trading in so many phony securities that were not worth what they pretended to be worth, and that disordered the banking system.
Okay.
I think what you're describing is something that there's a concept called a high trust or low trust society. And America was once a remarkably high trust society. You see it evinced in something like the movies of the 1940s. If you watch a Preston Sturges movie and see how people behaved and see what a common culture is and how it represents an agreement between people in a nation about what reality is and what the rules are for reality. And, one of the things that has happened, things play out very strangely with unintended consequences over decades. And one thing that played out was the weird consequences of the civil rights crusade of the 1960s. And I lived through that. I was alive back then. And basically, I was a teenager, and, I could tell what was going on. So in 1962, 63, 64, we were in a situation where we really needed to get rid of the Jim Crow culture and the Jim Crow laws in America, because we were affecting to be the leader of the free world, so-called. And you couldn't do that if you were living in a society that had, second-class citizens. So we did, and we were at that point pretty much a high-trust society with a pretty sturdy common culture. And the civil rights crusade had some very strange and interesting side effects. By the way, I think it was a good thing that we had to do. It was absolutely necessary to do that. But it did have strange effects. And one strange effect, excuse me, was that a certain portion of Black America decided that they wanted to opt out and be separate. They didn't want to be part of a common culture. This was the Black separatist movement began about 1962, 63 with Malcolm X. And in 1963 and 4, the two hallmark civil rights pieces of legislation passed. The Public Accommodations Act in 63 or 64, and the Voting Rights Act in 64, 65. And at that point, you get a real movement to opt out of the of joining, this invitation to join American common culture after all of these years of being excluded. And it's represented by, certain figures. Malcolm X got killed about, 64, 65, I believe, around in there. But, his banner was picked up by others. And that went on for a while through the 60s. And then a weird thing happens in the 70s and 80s. A lot of people, especially a lot of liberals, begin to detect that the civil rights movement is not working out as wonderfully as they thought. It did not introduce this utopia of equality that we had expected, maybe, or hoped for. And so they introduced something to make compensate for it, which they called multiculturalism. Multiculturalism was the idea that you didn't need to have a common culture in America. You could have many cultures, and with that, many different kinds of behavior, and no agreement about what was decent behavior and what wasn't, and many other points of value that we were not able or didn't want to agree upon anymore. And that was a tremendously destructive thing. It basically gave the left, liberal America, Democratic Party America, it gave them a pass to even imagine that we should have a common culture in America. And without a common culture, you're not going to have a high trust society.
Right.
And so the very thing that best characterized America at its best spiritually as a culture was thrown away. And that in turn has sort of, morphed and elaborated and become more and more extreme over the ensuing decades since the 1980s. We went through the political correctness period, and that morphed into a period of Jacobin persecution, in which if you didn't agree with any of the ideas of the left and their notion of how we should treat society, then you were actively persecuted and punished. And in fact, it brought out a side of the Democratic Progressive Party that was really shocking, which was their masochism and sadism. The pleasure that they took in punishing their enemies and their opponents. And, you saw that very clearly.
And just so we're clear, it's not just the punishment and the pain that they cause their adversary. It's the symbolism involved in when they cause that pain.
Well, you have to explain that. I'm not quite sure what you're alluding to.
So let's hypothetically say you were going to do something to file a lawsuit. You would want to make sure that somebody got that. If they were a Christian, you knew they were a Christian, you would serve them on the 24th of December if it was in December. You would find some way to tie it back to something that you could disrupt so they would remember that for the rest of their life. That's the innate.
Well, that's where the sadism comes in. They wanted to turn the screw. They wanted to twist the knife as much as possible to hurt their opponents as much as possible. And I think that traditional America, sometimes called conservative America, and now known as MAGA America, was just confounded by that. Didn't know how to deal with such cruelty and insanity. We have now. It took a number of years, and it took an awful lot of abuse on the part of the left on traditional America. But we've got it now. We know that we were abused. We know that we were played. We know that the left is insane. And we know that we have to retrieve a common culture in order to succeed as a nation.
James, I would argue something that I think is really important, and that is good people are capable of great violence, much bigger violence than I would say our counterparts are. In other words, there's an underpinning that's happening right now where the temperature of good people, their patience level to tolerate evil and what's happened to them up to this point is waning. So the less accountability we see in market, the more likely they are to take this into their own hands collectively.
Well, notice something that, almost all the violence in America in the last 10, 20 years has come from the left. 100%. And the right, the traditional Americans, have been remarkably patient with this nonsense. I think what's happening now is actually quite hopeful, because I see a lot of sign that we are going to deal with this stuff institutionally. I do believe that Mr. Trump's Department of Justice is quite serious about prosecuting the Russiagate crimes and many of the other crimes that occurred in this country over the last 10 years. Oh, well, you're shaking your head and you disagree.
Yeah,
we can debate about that. But I find that it's very hopeful. I see every sign that they're sincere about it and that their intention is serious.
All right, so I'm going to agree with a couple of things. One, the academics of what you're saying of going after people for Russiagate, that is true. I will tell you right now that the American people don't give two squirts of shit about Russiagate. What they care about is the things that adversely affected them. Being forced to actually take vaccines, watching their loved ones die, watching
It's all
people come
part of
across
one
the
thing,
border.
though. It's all part of one program of aggression against traditional America. They're not really separate. And in fact, one of the things that I think is hopeful about it is that the DOJ is going to prosecute it more or less as one continuing crime with a lot of different components and modules to it. So, yeah, I don't think that that you can separate those things out quite so clearly. It was, it was one long programmatic aggression against sanity, common sense, traditional American values, and well, I'll stop there.
Well, yeah, but I think I don't think we disagree on the fact that President Trump is going to enact a certain amount of accountability, aka vengeance, against those people that have done really bad things. But I will tell you, until the long arm of the law gets to the point where the people are the ones that is the reason, you're going to continue to see this discontent that's happening. I mean, I see it every day.
How are the people not the people in quotes not the reason for what the DOJ is aiming to do? How are they not part of that?
All right,
It seems to me that Mr. Trump is quite clear that he was elected by the people to represent the people and the people's aspirations and desires. And one of the things that they apparently desire is to correct these abuses of the last 10 years.
All right. So there's a causal point of what people see that is a symbol of them getting justice, people getting justice. Okay? Mm-hmm. And Russiagate was about the fact that President Trump was colluding with Russia and was doing things to adversely affect America by having a special relationship with Russia.
Well, that was the accusation. That's not what the scandal was about. The scandal was about them using that false accusation to try to seditiously remove Trump from his first
several
term.
Times. But the epicenter of that, the academics of that, or is it President Trump was the epicenter, right? Right now, and James, I'm going to argue this till the cows come home, because I like to look at the math of whether or not the temperature for people is going down. And I would argue that in the last 9 months, the temperature has gone up and not gone down.
I would agree with you that people are very impatient. But part of that is that I think they don't understand one component of the whole piece here, which is that if cases are going to be brought against these people, James Comey, Brennan, really high up officers of the government, these cases have to be carefully prepared, and they got to be good cases, good solid cases. And you don't do that in a week and a half or 6 weeks. It takes time to do that. I think that we will see in the medium term, going into the fall towards winter, that it will have happened with remarkable speed.
Okay.
In terms of how the law operates.
So I heard this similar thing, but I'm not pushing back on you on the fact they're going to go after Comey and all. But again, I don't care about this. See, there's a difference that when we look at trying to solve a problem, you can service the symptom or you can solve the problem. It's XBML, business model language, right? So you use that to establish what it is that your target is. And right now, there's a massive problem in our society that people feel like they're invisible, that they don't matter. Even if collectively it's for the good of the people, people don't feel like that it ever hits their community because the judges are corrupt, not against President Trump. That's one check of a equation. But they're corrupt against them and their community. They have become persecuted individually. And until we get to the bottom of solving election crimes and saying, listen, I appreciate all the stuff about Russiagate, but you have an obligation to make it so that the people feel like collectively they have a voice. And right now, they don't feel that way because you have a largely...
Joe, look, I think it's quite clear to me anyway that Mr. Trump's DOJ and FBI are actually going to go after the 2020 election fraud and 2022 and 2024 election fraud. It's quite clear to me they're not going to give a pass to that. There's just they can't do everything at once. As far as the COVID stuff this is concerned, the COVID vaccine tyranny goes. I think we have to imagine that we're very fortunate that Bobby Kennedy is in the position that he's in, and yet we have to understand what a difficult position he is in, and that he's got to be very careful and delicate about how he disassembles this tyrannical pharma matrix that has been erected. It's very powerful. It has a lot of money. It has a lot of allies and helpers in the government and elsewhere. And he's got to be careful. I think he's doing it admirably at this point. And I'm willing to stand by, as a traditionalist American observer, and see how he carries this out.
Yeah. So just so we're clear, I don't have to agree with everything that President Trump does to support him as the CEO and commander in chief in the country. So I think it's important that we give color to the people, because the people are the ones that ultimately are the ones that are feeling like things aren't happening fast enough. As it pertains to Bobby Kennedy, Bobby's amazing. Like, had President Trump not run for office, I would have supported Bobby, even if he ran on the Democrat ticket.
Yeah, I was running campaign meetings for him in the spring of 24.
So I believe that he is a man of great character. They've torn him down quite a bit. He likes women. That's not a secret. He's liked women for 50 years.
Yeah, but he wasn't hiding any of that. He wasn't hiding anything.
Not.
He wasn't hiding his heroin addiction when he was a kid, or a young. Even when he was middle-aged, he was, he was probably using. But he's come a long way. He's flipped his life around, and he's completely serious and a true patriot. And I think we're going to address all these things, but time is nature's way of making sure that everything doesn't happen at once. And not even Donald Trump, who is proving to be a pretty able manager of this polity, even he can't make everything happen at once, and he's got to pick his fights carefully. And I think he's doing a pretty good job of picking his fights carefully for now.
Yeah, I mean, look, selfishly, I want the people that actually have the machines, the election machines and the mail-in ballots, and the people that actually stole the voice of the people and put criminals in positions of power over the last 20 years. I want those people to hang from a bridge personally. But I mean, I realize that their time will come in this life or the next. But there's not a whole lot you can give back to the public other than, some justice that's going to quell that thirst. I just my hesitation is that thirst is growing, and there's a large.
Well, like I said, they're impatient. People are very impatient. They've had to witness this for years, and they've been messed around with for years and lied to for years, and they're certainly sick of it. And in relation to this business about a trust society, there's also a feature of that called the trust horizon. And that's a phrase that was kind of cooked up by Raul Mayer and his blogging partner, Nicole Foss, about 10 years ago. The trust horizon is an idea. Raul is the guy who puts out the Automatic Earth website. And the trust horizon idea is that in these times of terrible political stress, as you can no longer trust far away institutions, and the horizon creeps closer and closer to where you are. Now, one of the problems with that in America in particular is that, and this gets back to one of the early nonfiction books I wrote, the Geography of Nowhere, is that our communities have become so destroyed by suburban sprawl and all of its features that people all over America do not feel like they are part of any community or any organism close at hand that they feel that they can belong to. They don't really know their neighbors. They don't do anything with them. And that's making it harder for people to do things locally, even if it's getting rid of bad judges and running elections for judges who are better judges. It's harder and harder for them to do that. And
We've made justice for the average person unachievable.
Well, it is. It's very difficult at the moment. And, even if you happen to have the misfortune of getting tangled up in the legal system, at the very least, it's going to cost you a hell of a lot of money and may bankrupt and ruin you and destroy your family and your household. And that's a well understood thing. And that's terrible too. That's one of the consequences of having so many people go into higher education and law school that we've produced too many lawyers who have nothing better to do than harass their fellow citizens. Shakespeare was famous in one of the Henry plays. One of the characters early in the play says, they're talking about an insurrection in the kingdom, and he says, "First kill all the lawyers." And, we're kind of at that point in America. Now, apropos of what we appear to be, really grappling with here is the whole question of what's called lawfare. And there's a whole component of truly evil lawyers out there, mostly working for the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
Who have dedicated themselves to this program for obfuscating and destroying and shredding the law, turning it upside down, turning it into an instrument for delaying justice and for directing justice in the wrong direction, mainly towards the victims of injustice. And these are people like Mark Elias, who played a large part in the election fraud program, because it was a program, of 2020. And Norm Eisen, who played a role in that and played a role in Russiagate, and also a large role in the first impeachment of Trump. And Mary McCord, who worked in various positions at the Department of Justice and the FBI, National Security Division, and has been, I think she's sort of lodged at Georgetown U now, which has become a haven for lawfare artists and other bad actors. And Andrew Weissman, who ran the Mueller Commission because Robert Mueller was pretty much, non compos mentis, as he demonstrated in the one hearing. I forget whether it was the Senate or the House, but he was called into Congress to testify about his commission. And he was unable to and unwilling to answer just about any question coherently. And it became obvious that he was out of it. And it was obvious to just about everybody who was paying attention that Andrew Weissman was running the Mueller Commission with 19 or so Democratic Party stalwart lawfare lawyers, and that the whole purpose of it was basically to cover up the Russiagate mischief. And all of that was so complex and so hidden by institutional armor that it has been very hard for anybody to sort it out. But now, now that there is a different group of people running the DOJ, and they are firing a lot of the old people and the bad actors, and they're, every day discovering new people who have got to go. I think that the picture has changed, and we are capable of sorting it out, and we are going to sort it out, and these people are going to be brought to justice, and we are going to get, we're going to, I think, correct what has been a terrible episode in our country's history.
I pray that you were right.
It is.
I just pray that it happens faster than it is right now for the greater good, because otherwise I think your initial assessment of total societal collapse will happen.
Well, that's on a parallel track. And, that's even something that is part of a greater, shall we say, a greater zeitgeist, which maybe pertains to things like the fourth turning idea, or the 80-year chondritive
fourth turning
cycles. Well, he described it. He described it pretty well. They described it. It was two guys, two authors, But you know, a lot of look, history is a trickster. History is very strange. Um,
Written by
in
the
the
victors.
fourth turning narrative, there's a character called the Gray Champion who they talk about, and what they mean by that is that, you know, some elder generational character comes along to attempt to rescue the country from a terrible crisis. Well, who imagined that that character would be, you know, a real estate developer and TV host named Donald Trump, the most improbable sort of national champion you can imagine. But, you know, it's weird. People come out of nowhere. A similar thing, well, a similar thing kind of happened at the end of the French Revolution, where, you know, the French Revolution dragged on a whole lot longer than the American Revolution did. And it did not end favorably with a constitutional government that anybody was pleased with. It just ended in exhaustion and a vacuum of leadership. And, you know, around 1796 or 98 or so, I forget exactly, there was a body of politicians in charge in Paris, and they weren't doing very well. And there was an uproar in Paris. So they called in an artillery officer to put down this uprising. The artillery officer was a 26-year-old young man named Napoleon Bonaparte, and he put down the insurrection very, very handily, and he had the appearance of tremendous competence, and he also had a certain amount of charisma about him. And all of a sudden, everybody in Paris just turned to this 26-year-old guy, and they said, he's the guy. He's the guy who's going to get us out of this terrible slough that we've fallen into. And, you know, lo and behold, in a few years, you know, he morphs from being a consul or co-director of the government to being the emperor of France. And, you know, nobody expected that. Nobody expected France to go back to being some kind of a monarchy, you know, just 15 years after the revolution. But there you go. Things happen. Weird things happen. So weird things will happen in the USA. And the best thing you can do is prepare yourself, become a competent person managing your own life, taking care of your own business, and finding a geographical place that's worth defending.
So if we look at this from the perspective of the next 5 years, because I think that's what people are interested in, is like short term, 1 year. Okay, can we put up the short term pain? Is 5 years an acceptable kind of outlook of, okay, can we look 5 years ahead?
I think the next 5 years is going to be pretty disorderly. People are going to have to put up with a lot of pain. Probably my
We've
generation.
We've already done that for 5 years. You're telling us
no, we put up with a lot. No, we put up with some pain and a lot of discomfort and a lot of aggravation. But you know, you're going to see. But that's not pain. It's not like going, look. You know what pain is? Pain is walking around the rubble of Berlin in 1945, in July of 1945, 3 months after the war is over. That's pain. You know, we haven't done that. You know, we're going to go through some very, very difficult economic bottlenecks. Part of it is going to be the petroleum problem, which we have forgotten about completely. We're not paying attention to it at all. Part of it is going to be the fake money problem, the fact that banking and investment is so corrupt. Part of it is going to be the technology problem, where we're creating too many technical miracle things that can harm us and kill us. And part of it is going to be just political sloth and inertia and an inability to get out of the habits that we're in. Like, you know, all this nonsense that's going on in Congress, like, you know, we're unable to confirm Mr. Trump's nominees to head departments and things like that for stupid reasons.
Hey, listen, I remember it took to confirm Bob Destro for the Deputy Secretary of State for the continent of Africa, dealing with humanitarian aid. It took almost 3 years to confirm him. 3 years.
Yeah.
On President
Why do
Trump's
you
first
why do
term.
you even stick around?
So, but we have the House and the Senate. Here's the other thing: we have the capability right now of solving massive problems with Congress, but a
Yes, we
vast
do.
majority of our party, they say the Republican Party. I don't know if you were in the party, but let's say the Republican Party is captured by a little known organization called AIPAC and a few other obscure lobbyist groups that for whatever they stand for, like it when things don't get accomplished and we don't retreat on this 100-yard field that we were up against the 5-yard line.
I'm not sure that they're that interested in doing that. I would, and by the way, I was born Jewish. I'm not much of a
Jewish Christian, so I mean,
I'm not much of a practicing Hebrew, but I do think that AIPAC probably exercises too much interest, in attempting to do everything it can to keep the money flowing to Israel, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't think that they have any vested interest in upsetting American values, tradition, government, social order, any of that, and not at all. If anything, they have an interest in us remaining as stable as possible. And so a lot of that, I think, is just a different kind of hysteria. We're living in a historical moment of manifold and serial hysterias. If it's not one thing, it's another. If it's not the Me Too movement with, middle-class women going nuts over imagined rape scenarios, and stuff like that, then it's a racism hysteria. It's a tranny hysteria.
Right.
It's just one thing after another.
So, James, let's embrace our roots, our Hebrew Jewish roots, and let's be honest about the fact that we actually don't know who runs some of these organizations, these amorphous organizations like AIPAC. We don't know, and it's not just AIPAC that's a problem. Pharma's a problem. I mean, we can go downstream and look at the ADL and the.
I don't quite believe that. I think that if you look closely enough, these people are in plain sight. It's like, the idea that I hear from a lot of my conservative friends, and I have, most of my remaining friends are conservatives because all my old hippie friends have bounced me. But, they often refer to some, mysterious they, the globalists, the bankers, the Rothschilds. I don't buy any of that, really. I think that most of the people who are doing the damage are in plain sight. Christine Lagarde and Macron and, Klaus Schwab, whatever he's got left, Larry Fink. These people are all plainly visible. The thing is that they haven't had to answer for any of their crimes and misdeeds, and they haven't had to do any splaining about what they're up to.
Well, let's
I think
talk
that's
about
over.
splaining. Let's talk about splaining for a minute, because you wrote a blog just recently, called Ghislaine Splaining.
I wrote it at 4:00 this morning, starting at Ghislaine Splaining.
Yeah. So you how did you get her transcript?
It's right out there on the internet. In my case, I happened to go to a website that I favor called The Last Refuge, also sometimes known as the Conservative Treehouse, and he had the Justice Department link right on the website on. I guess it was Friday night. You have to go back a couple of pages to get to it, but it's right there. The Justice Department has all the transcripts. They've been released to the public. You can read them all. They're pretty interesting.
Okay, so what do you take about her separating herself from Epstein and saying that she had a
what I wrote this morning. Well, what I wrote this morning was that if you actually read the transcript and look, this is a woman who has been involved, who's been implicated in this great crime against humanity
in prison for it
for over 15 years. it turns out this was actually known before she said it in the transcript in the interview, but people didn't pay attention to it. She, in the course of all of this, in the course of all of these court cases and transactions, including her own trial, nobody from the government ever interviewed her before Todd Blanche sat her down 2 weeks ago to do it. No one talked to her. No one interviewed her. She said no one even called her on the phone. You know,
James, that's true because the FBI has long had a history of being the cartel henchmen. Like they're the ones that take swipes at people, will raid somebody's home, put the fear of God into a particular individual, but rarely get to the bottom of any crime. Usually that's done on a local level and they just take over a case. But
well, yeah, they've been bad actors. They've been bad actors for a long
decades.
time.
For decades.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think you know there are kind of goes in a sine and cosine curve, and you know there are worse times and better times, and the last 10 years have been the worst. I mean, it's worse than even when J. Edgar Hoover was dancing around in a dress.
They worked with the CIA
and blackmailing the Kennedy administration.
I mean, they worked with the CIA to murder the president of the United States. So
it's a high probability.
So I just think that it's more pervasive now that we can see it. I mean, it's more.
Well, they went so far. You know, they were so overconfident under Mueller and then Comey, you know, and whoever was in between, or you know, the last several guys. They were so overconfident that, I mean, look how look how errant their behavior was, you know, in the Russiagate thing. You know, guys like Peter Strzok, you know, a very high up official. I mean, he was the head of counterintelligence. He wasn't just some schmuck agent in, you know, in some remote office. He was a high up guy, and he was about as arrogant as you could possibly be about being able to do anything you want to do to anybody. And that's how they were. And you know, it's different now.
So what do you say? What do you think about what do you think about the crime family that we're dealing with right now? Because you know the FBI.
I think it's well, which crime family are you talking about?
Well, I mean, I'll just point to, you know, you can't even call it the Biden crime family because he was an empty shell. And since you've been around Washington for decades, confirm this for me, because I remember being underneath in the congressional dining area, the dumbest human being, the dumbest person in Congress for decades was known as one person. What was his name?
For decades. Yeah, I don't know who you're referring to.
Joe Biden.
I mean, I know who it is now.
Joe Biden was known to be the dumbest human being. They would literally say that there was an award, the guy that would get it was Joe Biden. And people would openly talk about
that, of course. Sure.
He was nearly retarded. And they would talk about him that way.
I don't think he was nearly retarded, but he was pretty dim. And, you know, obviously the guy was a tool. And obviously he was running a racket of his own family racket. But, you know, I regard a lot of what went on in the Democratic Party and indeed in the federal government for the last, 20, 30 years as just a giant racketeering operation. Now, I think Mr. Trump needs a lot of credit for cutting off the revenue flow from USAID, which was supporting a great deal of that.
Yeah,
it was supporting a lot of CIA ops, and it was supporting all these nonprofits that were assisting the lawfare program.
James, I said this back in 2011. I said it back in 2011.
It was pretty obvious.
I can't be the smartest guy, but nobody has said this stuff. No,
Mr. Trump's appointees said it, and then they went after USAID, and then they demonstrated exactly what a money funnel operation and money laundering operation it was. And now, you know, it's been disabled, and now a lot of that money ain't going to be going to the places that have been used to getting it. I mean, look at USAID absolutely and entirely supported the shock troops of the Democratic Party in the last 10 years. They paid for BLM, they paid for Antifa, they paid for riots, they paid for they paid largely for the election rigging operations. They paid for all that, and now they're gone. And they're not going to pay for it anymore. And the Democratic Party is cratering, collapsing. They're pathetic. Even the things that they're doing to grasp at straws now, in the twilight of their existence, are pathetic. They're just tripling down on their racism bullshit and their tranny bullshit, and they seem to not have a clue.
I love how you just put it right out there. That tranny bullshit. You tell someone
Well, that's
old
what it
school.
is.
He's like walks out. He's like, nah, I'm just gonna call that bullshit what it is. Bullshit.
Let me tell you something about the whole tranny thing, which most people miss. Okay, in fact, this is one of the things that our culture is very confused about, and they have been deliberately confused. Remember the drag queen story hour?
Oh yeah.
Okay. And everybody, not everybody, traditional America, MAGA America, was very offended by that and was complaining about it a lot. You know what those guys were doing, the drag queens? They were not pretending to be women. That's bullshit. They were pretending to be monsters. They were presenting women as monsters. That was the whole theme of the whole program. Now, why they would want to do that, I don't know. I think it was, just another attempt to present mental illness as a desirable thing to aspire to, which is another way of Jacobin progressivism turning America upside down and inside out, because they want to do that. They want to destroy our culture. They want to destroy the economy. They want to destroy American tradition. And that's one way to do it. But, it wasn't what it pretended to be. A lot of things aren't what they pretend to be.
No, I would agree with you fully.
But anyway, getting back to your point, what we've seen is a gigantic racketeering operation. And that's one of the reasons that the Democratic Party is losing its mind now. And, it's being disassembled. I think Mr. Trump and his people know exactly what they're aiming at and what to go for and what to take apart. And they're doing it systematically.
Yeah, so I believe that the weak President Trump is a strong man among weak people, and he's got a couple.
Quite right.
He's got a couple of strong people. I thought Susie Wiles was a problem. I don't think she's a problem anymore. Matter of fact, the more and more I see her operate, the more intrigued I am by her. Look, she's a tenacious individual, but her tenacity and her ability to get things done and to call out people very readily. Now,
I'm glad to hear you say that.
I think other people, like Kardashian Patel, Kash Patel, I call him Kardashian Patel.
Yeah.
Right? Wears a little fake badge on his thing, Deputy Doofeeler down here. He's got a little FBI badge, right? Who can't seem to stand up and do the right thing and has to play, social media man of, breaking, everything's breaking. Like this is the head of the FBI, and he walks around acting like he's I don't even know what you'd call him. Madonna?
The drama queen.
Yeah, I mean he's a girl. Look, I think he's a
He's not a girl. I don't think so. I think he's all right, but
I can't stand him.
He's a little bit more showbiz than we're used to. But I have a lot of confidence in Bongino, and look, they just hired Andrew Bailey,
that guy's
the very competent Attorney General of Missouri, to be a co-deputy.
No.
And you know why they did that?
Kardashian's on his way out, brother. Kardashian's on his way out. He's going to run the FBI.
Be. No, he may be, but in the meantime, do you know why they did that?
Because neither one of them can find themselves out of a box.
No, that's not why. It's because they got so much to do. There's so much going on there that they needed another strong guy to process all of this crap that they're having to deal with.
All right, I'm going to have you back on. And look, I like to crack jokes and I like to poke at people. And
I like to crack jokes too.
And Kardashian Patel is such an easy target. He's just easy. He put
Well-
this video up of the 100, 200, 100 pull-ups or 50 pull-ups and 100 push-ups. And then he put the video out and he put it on time delay, like a time lapse. And he put it out like 3.5 minutes, but it was really like 30 minutes. so you can't ever get enough. It's like the thing that always keeps giving is some of these guys are just, you're not